In the final winter of the 1940s, as the ashes of a shattered world cooled, a silent tension began to seep across continents, an unease so delicate that no headline could capture it, yet powerful enough to reshape destinies before most citizens sensed the shifting winds gathering above them. The triumph over tyranny had not brought peace. Instead, it revealed a deeper fracture, a divide between two visions of humanity, one born in the open halls of democracy, the other forged behind iron gates where ideology demanded absolute obedience and secrecy became a necessary shield. In Washington, whispers echoed through dim corridors, carrying the belief that victory had merely invited a new adversary, one whose strategies did not march beneath banners but moved like shadows under locked doors, silent, patient, and woven into the cracks of a fragile post-war order. Across the vast expanse of the Soviet realm, the guardians of the Kremlin looked outward with wary resolve, certain that the West sought to penetrate their borders, not with armies but with ideas meant to dissolve their authority from within, a threat more insidious than any weapon of steel. Thus, two instruments of power emerged, shaped not in celebration but in fear: the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States and the formidable Committee for State Security of the Soviet Union, each conceived as both shield and dagger against a world slipping toward uncertainty. Though their uniforms differed, their purpose mirrored one another, for both institutions were designed to operate where truth dissolved into rumor, where alliances shifted unnoticed, and where the future of nations could be altered by a single whispered secret carried in a diplomat's briefcase. The early encounters between these rivals unfolded not in open conflict, but in coded messages, stolen documents, and quiet footsteps trailing diplomats through foreign capitals, each side testing the other, seeking weakness without revealing its own trembling doubts. It was during these formative years that the silent Cold War truly began, long before treaties hardened into policy or borders bristled with weapons, for the real battle was fought in the invisible realm of suspicion and perception, where every gesture became a clue and every silence a warning. Ordinary citizens returned to their daily routines, unaware that their world had entered an era where unseen hands could influence elections, collapse governments, or redirect history without a single shot fired, a realm where danger rarely announced itself before striking. For the CIA and the KGB, the contest ahead would not be measured in victories or defeats, but in shadows thrown across decades, shadows that concealed motives, manipulated truth, and carved fear into the hearts of leaders who understood how fragile the balance between peace and catastrophe had become. And so the stage was set for a struggle waged without banners or fanfare, a contest in which the loudest moments occurred in silence, and where the fate of the world would hinge not on armies, but on unseen choices made by men and women who lived their entire lives in the dark. From the earliest days of the Cold War, the silent duel between the CIA and the KGB unfolded in distant capitals, where flags meant little and loyalty shifted like desert sand beneath a moonless winter sky. Neither side announced its presence, yet both moved with deliberate precision, weaving invisible threads through embassies, ports, consulates, and cafes where a careless word could alter the course of nations. Agents traveled under borrowed names, carrying forged histories as carefully as diplomats carried treaties, their lives stitched together from half-truths designed to withstand interrogation or sudden betrayal. The KGB excelled in the art of patience, planting deep-cover officers who lived entire lifetimes unnoticed, their missions stretching across decades, concealed beneath ordinary routines and unremarkable smiles. The CIA, more restless in its ambition, sought windows into the Soviet mind through bold recruitment, quiet bribes, desperate defectors, and whispered promises made in alleys shadowed by foreign neon lights. Each success inspired deeper paranoia in the opposing camp, for in this secret war, knowledge itself was a weapon sharper than steel, capable of toppling governments or exposing vulnerabilities long kept hidden. In the smoky hallways of Moscow's Lubyanka, analysts studied every intercepted cable with monastic focus, searching for patterns that might reveal American intent before politicians sensed the shifting currents. Meanwhile, in Langley, the quiet hum of fluorescent lights illuminated maps pierced with needles marking sleeper networks, listening posts, and fragile alliances that could fracture without a whisper of warning. Every intercepted message, every discreet meeting, Every defecting courier carried a weight measured not in ink or paper, but in consequences. For a single misread clue could send leaders stumbling toward disaster. Some operations succeeded with elegant subtlety, leaving behind only faint ripples that historians later struggled to trace. Others collapsed violently, exposing agents who vanished into prisons or unmarked graves. Yet even in failure, each side learned to read the other's fears. The CIA saw Soviet anxiety in tightened border controls, while the KGB sensed American hesitation in sudden diplomatic shifts in quiet retreats. By the dawn of the 1950s, the world had become a chessboard scattered with invisible pieces. Pieces moved not by kings or generals, but by anonymous figures who lived fully inside the realm of lies. And as these unseen actors maneuvered through the shadows, one truth grew unmistakable. The silent Cold War had evolved into a contest where victory meant remaining undiscovered and defeat meant oblivion. In the deepening twilight of the Cold War, the struggle between the CIA and the KGB shifted from distant frontiers to the fragile interior of human loyalty, where the battlefield was not land or ideology, but the uncertain landscape of the human heart, vulnerable to fear, ambition, and the weight of secrets. For both services, the greatest victories no longer came from stolen documents or intercepted cables, but from turning a single individual, a lone soul who understood that crossing the line meant abandoning every fragment of the life they once recognized as their own. The KGB perfected the art of pressure, shaping loyalty through fear as much as through conviction, binding its officers with oaths whispered beneath portraits of party leaders whose stern gazes tolerated no doubt. The CIA, driven by a different creed, sought allies in quiet desperation, offering freedom, safe passage, or the faint promise of a future unburdened by the suffocating grip of authoritarian watchfulness. Defectors became the most valuable currency in this silent war, each carrying within them years of hidden knowledge, names, routes, intentions, information so delicate that a single revelation could collapse entire networks built patiently by anonymous agents now trapped deep behind hostile borders. Some crossed over out of conscience, appalled by the cruelty they witnessed. Others fled pure survival, haunted by the suspicion that their own comrades had begun to whisper their names in dangerous rooms. The story of these men and women rarely ended with applause. For the moment they stepped into the arms of the opposite service, they entered a new exile, cut from their past, mistrusted by their future, and bound to a fate that neither side could fully control or guarantee. In dim interrogation rooms, CIA officers listened as defectors described the inner workings of Moscow's fearful machinery, speaking in hushed tones as though the walls themselves might betray them to the east. Meanwhile, in secret chambers beneath the Lubyanka, KGB interrogators dismantled the testimonies of Western informants, seeking cracks in their resolve, testing every detail for deceit, error, or intentional mislead. Some tales were triumphs, others tragedies. A few agents vanished without explanation, leaving behind only rumors, whispers of double alliances, coded messages gone astray, or betrayals conceived in silent corners. As the 1950s waned, both agencies discovered a harsh truth. The most dangerous enemy was not the other side's ambition, but the fragile, unpredictable nature of human beings who carried the burden of lies. And through these fragile actors, the Cold War gained a new shape, no longer merely a contest of nations, but a struggle woven into the hearts of individuals who walked each day unsure which shadow belonged to them and which shadow belonged to those waiting patiently to claim their souls. As the silent Cold War deepened, the world drifted toward a precipice shaped not by armies or speeches, but by shadows moving beneath diplomatic smiles, shadows cast by the CIA and the KGB as they fought their most dangerous battle yet. The battle to predict the future before the other side could seize the first move. By the dawn of the 1960s, intelligence chiefs on both sides sensed an approaching storm, a shift in the global balance so subtle that only the most attentive analysts recognized its gathering momentum. Beneath ordinary news headlines that reassured citizens everything remained calm and under control. In Moscow, KGB strategists studied the West with a stark intensity, convinced that hidden forces in Washington were engineering a quiet encirclement, using alliances, foreign aid, and covert agents to undermine the Soviets not through open conflict, but by unraveling their influence thread by fragile thread. Meanwhile in Langley, CIA officers pored over satellite images, defectors' whispers, and the faintest tremors in diplomatic behavior, believing that the Kremlin was preparing moves that could redraw borders overnight, leaving the United States scrambling to respond to a crisis it never saw forming. The discovery of Soviet missiles in a Caribbean nation would soon prove these fears justified. But even before that revelation shook the world, the two agencies were already locked in a frantic duel of interpretation, each racing to decode motives, strategies, and half-concealed signals from the other side. In smoky war rooms, maps glittered with colored pins marking potential flashpoints, from divided Berlin to turbulent Asia, from restless Africa to fragile alliances stretched thin across the Middle East's shifting sands. For both agencies understood that a single misstep in any region could crack the world in half. The KGB deployed watchers across Havana, Cairo, Jakarta, and Hanoi, convinced that revolutions could be guided like storms, gathering strength in silence until the moment they reshaped entire governments without the need for tanks or formal declarations from Moscow's austere Kremlin chambers. The CIA responded with equal urgency, sending field officers under diplomatic cover into capitals trembling with unrest, hoping to predict whether emerging leaders leaned toward the West, the East, or their own visions of independence that threatened to shatter the delicate balance held together by fear alone. Both sides felt history accelerating, as though the Cold War had entered a phase where time itself narrowed, compressing decisions into moments, leaving leaders and agents alike breathless beneath the pressure of choices whose consequences could ripple outward until they touched every shoreline on the planet. The public saw only fragments: a news bulletin, a disrupted summit, a speech hinting at distrust. Yet beneath those fragments lay a vast machinery of intelligence struggling to keep catastrophe at bay while straining under the weight of secrets too immense for any democracy or dictatorship to comfortably hold. For the CIA and the KGB, this era marked the transition from quiet maneuvering to a contest pulsing with urgency, a contest where misunderstanding could ignite devastation,
For the CIA,
and where clarity became
triumph
more rare,
came
more
tempered with
precious, and more difficult to seize than ever before in the turbulent history of global power. And as both agencies pushed deeper into the labyrinth of covert action and geopolitical brinkmanship, a single truth echoed across their hidden halls. The world was becoming a stage where unseen hands could shape destiny, and the silent Cold War was accelerating toward a moment that might decide its fate. By the closing years of the Cold War, the silent duel between the CIA and the KGB had reached a depth that even seasoned analysts struggled to comprehend, for the conflict no longer lived in maps or treaties alone, but in the invisible machinery of influence, shaping choices made by leaders who feared every hidden echo. Across Washington and Moscow, a trembling awareness took hold. Neither side could fully control the world they had spent decades trying to steer, and each victory carved unseen cracks that swelled quietly beneath the surface, waiting for the moment history would allow those fractures to finally break open. In the heart of the Soviet capital, KGB operatives fought desperately to maintain an empire fraying at its edges, studying unrest in Eastern Europe with a grim certainty that no amount of surveillance or pressure could hold back the rising storm now pulsing through streets, factories, and whispered conversations. Meanwhile in Langley, CIA officers watched the Soviet structure strain under economic collapse and political fatigue, yet even in their cautious optimism they sensed danger, knowing that great powers often become most unpredictable when cornered by fate, pride, and the fear of losing their place in the world's order. Defectors arrived carrying warnings that the old guard in Moscow feared the growing reform movement, while others insisted that the Kremlin saw opportunity in the chaos, believing that carefully applied pressure could reshape alliances before the West understood which way history had begun to lean. Both agencies intensified their quiet maneuvers, reaching deep into uncertain corridors where loyalties shifted like winter fog, and where a misplaced gesture or whispered hint could tip entire regions toward freedom, collapse, or renewed submission to the iron weight of familiar authority. But as the 1980s waned, something neither agency anticipated began to unfold. The Cold War started to dissolve, not through espionage or force, but through the collective exhaustion of nations that could no longer carry the burden of fear, secrecy, and endless ideological confrontation. The fall of the Berlin Wall struck with the force of a revelation, though neither the CIA nor the KGB dared to claim credit, for behind the celebrations both knew the truth. No agency could engineer the will of millions. And the greatest shifts in history often arrive quietly, without permission or prediction. Inside the KGB, panic mingled with disbelief as reports flooded in from collapsing republics. While in Langley, the mood mixed relief with caution, for even victory felt uncertain when the world unraveled so quickly that intelligence reports aged into irrelevance before analysts could finish reading them. In the years that followed, the Soviet Union dissolved into memory, and the KGB fractured into new forms. Yet the legacy of that silent duel endured, etched not in monuments but in the ghostly networks, coded archives, and unspoken scars left behind by those who served in the shadows of that long twilight struggle. For the CIA, triumph came tempered with unease, for it became clear that the end of one adversary did not bring an end to secrecy, manipulation, or rivalry. Instead, new threats emerged in the void left behind, demanding vigilance in ways that felt eerily familiar to the earliest days of the Cold War's trembling dawn. And so the silent conflict never truly ended. It merely shifted shape, slipping into digital realms, proxy wars, and quiet contests of influence carried out by unseen hands across continents that no longer felt the certainty of peace promised when the last Soviet flag was lowered beneath a pale winter sky. In the end, historians would argue endlessly over which side won, but those who lived within the shadows knew a different truth. Victory in a silent war is only an illusion, for every secret revealed gives birth to another, every triumph hides a cost, and every empire, open or hidden, walks along the edge of its own uncertainty, guided by whispers that fade long before the world understands their meaning. And as the curtain falls on that era of clandestine rivalry, one final question lingers, unanswered and quietly haunting. If the Cold War's greatest battles were fought in silence, how many remain undiscovered even now, waiting in archives untouched, in coded notes unread, or in memories sworn forever to the dark?